Hello friends! This is another short and simple video where I will attempt to explain how I made this dress. Emphasis on the word attempt because I made this half a year ago and I can no longer remember how. So let's figure it out together. I start by laying out the flimsiest fabric in my stash, not bothering to iron it first, I see. Not that it matters, it's a twill weave so you can't tear it, and it has less hold than my self-esteem. I measure what I think is 1 meter and cut out twice. The width of the fabric is about 145 centimeters, and these pieces will make up the skirt of the dress. Oh, so you ironed this part, I see. I make these strange shapes that will be sleeves, I think. I don't know why they look like that. Why did you think that was a good idea? Where did you get that from? Then I use my good old shirt pattern to draft the bodice. I wanted it to be off shoulder, so I'm adding what looks like 4 to 5 centimeters. I know that I should have added double of that to achieve the look I wanted. Then I cut it out without seam allowances. This explains why it ended up so small. Oh, but good, you added seam allowance around the neck. I am then copying the piece so I can line the bodice. And here I'm making a simple Peter Pan color. And now the cuffs, no, of course the front part of the bodice. To get it over my head, I added a button stand to the front, which is completely unnecessary when I'm also going to line it. I seem to be adding 1 centimeter seam allowances, so that's good. I cut out 4 of these. Then I'm making cuffs. Yes. Some very narrow and wonky ones. You shouldn't do this if you're going to film it. Not that I ever do this, but especially not when filming. Here I'm being a very good visual teacher and demonstrating how I made the button stand, which was useless. This seems to be the corresponding lining piece. Okay, so they go together like that. And now the back panel. Okay, we're making the side seams. And here is the color. This type of dress is called a sack dress. A sack gown is something that is very loosely fitted and basically hangs off your shoulders. It exists both feminine and masculine sack clothing. The name itself is French, as many fashion words are, but it's exactly what it sounds like and probably what YouTube subs it as, a sack. Dresses like these were popular house dresses and a good option for growing children. They were usually worn with an apron over it, this giving it a more structured look. Past me is then fitting the collar to the top layer of the bodice. And is this really a bodice? Maybe it's a yoke. Maybe yoke is a better term. Oh dear. Now look to be in a hurry, and I'm sewing gathering stitches into the skirt pieces. Only one row I see, you'll regret that. I've left the ends ungathered because this part will be under the arms and then fitting it to that single yoke layer. Sewing a double row of gathering stitches make the fabric lay nicer and makes it easier to sew. All the time you saved on making only one row is wasted double here. I also seem to leave those ungathered pieces off the yoke, as the no longer a bodice ends right above the bust line. Yeah, that looks easy to sew. I told you so. Here past me is deciding on how to close the button stand. I think they are starting to realize they've done something wrong. The front skirt panel is then sewed on the same as the back. Having some more fun with that single gathering row. Okay, I think we can skip ahead a bit. Then I put it on my mannequin to even the shoulders. And apparently making room for my arms. Not a bad idea. And I'm pretty sure I used the pieces I cut off as a guide to where to cut it on the other side. They look very focused right now. Then I'm sewing gathering stitches into the widest part of the funky sleeves. And is that... yeah, I think past me is learning the lesson and have made double rows of stitches this time. Well, doesn't that look fun and flimsy as heck? They are now fitted to the dress. I don't know which way is which, but I once again left the ends ungathered because I don't need drama in my armpits. Looks good past me. Stitching, stitching. Then they're fitting the lining to the inside of the yoke. Waving scissors around dangerously. Trimming the lining so it fits the yoke. This is generally something I strive to make happen. I match the neck hole and sew it together. Then I've prepared the seam allowances earlier, pressing them in. Now past me will fit it to the yoke, covering all of the raw edges. Here past me realized that the closure was a mess. Past me decided not to bother and fitted it as best as they could. The entire lining is then stitched down from the outside with a stitch in the ditch. I was convinced I'd done this by hand, which must mean I've done a really good job, or that I've never looked on the inside of this. But this must have been so tedious to sew and not fun at all. Then they seem to be stitching the arm and side in one, most likely with the overlock stitch on my machine. Without a single pin.
Yes.
With only one pin. Apparently I didn't bother filming making the cuffs, but I stitched it like a donut and seam allowances were ironed in, and past me is sandwiching the gathered sleeve into it and top stitching down. As much as I complain about this fabric, it looks like it irons really well. Here I've folded a narrow hem and stitching it down. Final step, I think. The back side of the button stand is stitched by hand, and I sew my buttonholes and the necessary buttons. The funny ruler is called a seamometer, and it's common in Northern Europe. You Americans are missing out. To me, this dress gives Peter Pan vibes, like Wendy. And it's probably because this is the type of dress she would wear as a nightgown in most adaptations. So that's the risk with these dresses, they look like pajamas. I think the brown is saving me. Making this in plaid or plain white would be difficult to pass off as anything but a nightgown. It also looks very childish, or what we would expect children to wear, seeing as it's so simple. So pairing this with an apron looks like a more complete outfit. Also, I found the slow-mo setting on my camera, and I've found a new appreciation for this dress. But why don't you decide? Thank you for following along. Until next time.